I want to see who agrees with my politics. I made a list here and see if you agree. This is a nutshell. This isn't exhaustive, just generally speaking. And I've been called an extremist for these views. Let's see if you agree. Okay, so in no particular order, pro-capitalist, which I think has been a miracle for the human race. But I do also like the 1990s traditional liberal push for decent safety nets. The 90s traditional liberal was also leery of that road to serfdom, so they didn't want to expand. They didn't want to expand welfare too much. I respected that about the traditional liberal. I'm pro-American. I'm pro-America. I'm patriotic. I think patriotism is greater than nationalism. Patriotism comes from the heart. Nationalism can, especially capital N nationalism, can become something that's enforced or pushed on the public. I think lowercase n nationalism and patriotism are pretty much the same thing. I think you should love your country, you should love your flag, while being able to note your country's failures and felonies. But above all, especially with America, be able to appreciate its ability to self-correct and improve. I think that's America's superpower, to self-correct. And by self-correction, it usually means going back, making sure we're living up to the founding ideals of the country. I'm pro-Second Amendment. I would probably like to see mandatory training for firearm purchases. I know there's downsides to that, but I think I would be okay with that. That would be a compromise. I'd be willing to have. I understand the counter arguments to this. Like, you need a gun now because somebody's after you and you still got to get training. So fair enough. But generally speaking, I would be in favor of that. But I do see the downsides. I'm for abortion bans after 12 weeks or so. I do think pro-lifers have the stronger arguments. I've studied this fairly extensively. Every time I walk away thinking the pro-lifers, from a philosophical point of view, if I just step back and let's say I'm an alien, I have no human in the fight, I feel like the pro-lifers have a stronger argument, but we're so far away from convincing a majority of the population that that life starts at conception, that we have to compromise. And I just don't see any other way. Kicking it to the states does seem somewhat reasonable. But so I am for abortion bans after 12 weeks or so. It sort of aligns with Europe. But again, I still think the pro-lifers win the arguments. I'm pro-Israel, but recognize Israel is not perfect, and innocent Palestinians suffer and die because of the actions Israel has to take because of Hamas. I think Hamas hides behind civilians. I think Hamas put their infrastructure all throughout Gaza. I don't think there's the G word going on. I think it's a traditional military action with a lot of collateral damage. But I'm generally pro-Israel because Israel tends to align more closely with the founding ideals of America, which I think are universal. So any country that starts to embody the ideals of, let's say, the Enlightenment and a certain spirituality, a generic spirituality, almost a deism. So anybody that starts to embody that, any country I tend to think of as American, meaning they align with that ethos that is very unique to America. I'm anti the governments of China, Iran, Russia, etc., while recognizing that many of their citizens are yearning for freedom. I have many Chinese, Persian, and Russian friends who in spirit are very American, very Western. Okay, and I don't really love the word Western, even though I think a lot of Western thinkers discovered universal ideas. So what we call Western, I tend to think of as universal, while recognizing there are some very good ideas that you might call Eastern that can also influence the West. But I think the East or the West, the good ideas are universal. So I don't really care who discovered them. But when we say Western ideals, in my mind, I'm thinking of universal ideas. Make sure the lights stay on here. Okay, I'm anti-conspiracy theories. I default to favor incompetence theories first and foremost. I've seen too many people go down the conspiracy rabbit hole. There are conspiracy theories that turn out to be true, of course, but generally speaking, if you don't want to look like a moron, favor incompetence over conspiracy. I'm pro-history. We need to teach it. We need to learn it. But there's a caveat here. The only thing more dangerous than a person who doesn't read history is a person who reads slanted history, whether far right or far left, like the crazy lunatic that Tucker Carlson just interviewed, who's completely inverted and thought Churchill was the villain, and the guy from Germany in the 1930s and 40s is the leader of Germany. His name starts with an H. That he was sort of a victim or wanted peace. Completely psychotic. And don't even get me started on various far left progressive interpretations of history. So I want history taught, but I want reasonable people to teach it. There are, of course, left and right slants on this, but there are reasonable left and right slants that should be taught. Again, I'm pro-Enlightenment. I love Enlightenment principles, sprinkled with some generic, quote-unquote, spiritual principles, such as a creator, and from the creator, we're given a soul, which gives us inalienable rights. If you're an atheist, I think you would look at our ability to have these inalienable rights as something like a unique genetic code or something. So I think an atheist, generally speaking, would understand the intent behind the idea of a creator and the idea of a soul, even if they ground it in materialism. I'm pro-merit over most all other considerations, though I did see for a while the need for something like affirmative action. I think America's kind of grown beyond that to a large extent. But when affirmative action was first announced, I thought it was probably necessary. But I think it's kind of petered out, and we've seen the ill effects of something like affirmative action on college campuses. I'm pro-U.S. military police actions to stop unwarranted killing. For instance, bombing the Serbs in the 90s as they were slaughtering the Bosniaks. So, people always say, oh, you hate Muslims, that's why you don't. It's like, look, in the 90s, when I was barely politically conscious, I was screaming, for the U.S. to start bombing the Christian Serbs as they were slaughtering Muslims. So I try to keep when there's an actual genocide going on or something like that, I try to always speak up on behalf of the people who are being attacked and killed and are truly the victims. I talk about the Uyghurs fairly constantly when I'm when I'm in conversations with leftists and certain people on the right wing as well, trying to raise awareness about the plight of Muslims in China. So anyways, I do like the U.S. to be kind of a police force, while acknowledging this can get obviously sloppy. It can get messy when we intervene in other countries, even with good intentions. I'm pro-intellectual diversity. I'm pro-colorblindness while recognizing the limits of colorblindness and noting the need at times to see color or ethnicity or race. I tend to call it color backgroundness, like we notice color, but we keep it in the background unless it's necessary to bring it to the foreground. I'm anti-woke and I'm anti-alt-right, not in a knee-jerk fashion, but I'm fundamentally against these ideologies as I think they gainsay those certain fundamental universal principles that America represents. I'm against any and all forms of socialism, Maoism, communism, theocracy, fascism, and so on. I'm anti-all extremist politics from the left and the right. We know enough history to know roughly what is good, politically speaking. We need to protect those great ideas, those Enlightenment ideas. I'm pro-genius and pro-great works. I'm pro-exposing students to those things. I'm pro-beauty. You would think everyone is, but that's not the case. I'm pro-transgender people. I think they deserve compassion and help, but should not be allowed to play in women's sports or use women's bathrooms. I feel under 18 transgenders should not be allowed to have surgery or pharmaceutical interventions, but should have access to therapy. Over 18, do what you wish or need to do. I'm pro-legal immigration, against illegal immigration, while noting that if I was from Guatemala or wherever, I'd probably try to sneak into the U.S. as well. I don't like to admit that, but I probably would. I'm pro-Americans over foreigners, but we should try to walk and chew gum at the same time to help both parties when possible, but always favor Americans. I'm pro-gay marriage and pro-marriage in general. I'm pro-human. I like humans. I think we are cool and we need more humans. Okay, so this is part one, and I'll finish up part two in a second video.